Okay, here we go. This is vocal lesson number 2, part 2. And now what we're going to do is we're going to work on verse 2, start to tighten it up. Okay, so let's take a listen. What's this?
It came.
So it's sort of a it. I think that word is it. All right. Now, one thing that I didn't really go over in detail in vocal recording lesson, vocal editing lesson number 1, is how to use the grid. So let's dive into that a little bit. So here's the grid up here. It sets up the resolution for your grid. Very important. The grid is your best friend in the world. So obviously you have to know rhythm and a little bit of math to use the grid. If you don't know rhythm and you don't know math and you don't have a sense for how a sequencer works, then we're going to have to do a little tutorial here on how a sequencer works. Number 1, you have the bar. So if I change that to bar, now it's showing me a grid line once every bar. So if I put my cursor into grid mode, now if I move the cursor and hold the mouse button down in select mode, I'm selecting a bar region. So that's 1 bar right there. If I zoom out a little bit, you can see that that's 1 bar. 4 beats. In 4/4 time, which this is, 4/4 time, that means 1 bar is a whole note or 4 beats, okay? Now, let's go to half note. Half note is 2 beats. So that would be beat 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4. 1 and 2, 3 and 4, okay? So now we're going to go to quarter notes. So that is 1 beat. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 4 beats per bar, 1 beat. Now we're going to go to eighth notes. Now, if you look up here on the ruler for the bars and beats, it's showing you exactly what's going on. You've got bar 33, beat 1, bar 33, beat 2, move the cursor, bar 3 beat 1, bar 33 beat 2, bar 33 beat 3, bar 33 beat 4, etc., bar 34. That's very important information. That's the most important information. If your session is not resolved to the correct tempo and in sync with the bars and beats, you can't do what I'm doing here because it won't work. So you have to know how to do that. That's a different lesson. So we're going to assume that your session is in sync to bars and beats, meaning it was cut to a click, and that if it's live music, or if it's, in the case of this music, it's a drum machine, but it's synced up to the bars and beats. Now, when this music came in, I didn't know what tempo it was, and it wasn't synced up to bars and beats, so I manually synced it up to bars and beats when I got the music in as the person gave it to me. That was the first thing I did before I started the session. That's another session. That's another lesson, rather. So we're going to assume that your music is already in sync to bars and beats, because I'm not going to go into that right here. Now we're going to go to eighth note. And when you click into eighth note, you're going to notice that these other numbers show up. Okay? So now you have bar, beat, and tick. Bar, beat, tick. So bar is 32, beat is 4, tick is 0. There are 960 ticks per quarter note in most modern DAW sequencers, etc., etc. It doesn't matter if it's Pro Tools or if it's Logic or Digital Performer, whatever it happens to be. 960 ticks is the standard. It's probably been the standard since about the mid 90s. Before that, it was 480 ticks per quarter note. That was the sort of 80s standard, and then they doubled it in the 90s to 960, and it's remained at 960 ever since. So these numbers must be burned into your brain. I'm going to burn them in now. Burn them in your brain. 0, 0, 0 is 1. That's beat 1, or eighth note number 1. Now, if you go to 16th notes, you're going to see more numbers appear. 0, 0, 0, that's the quarter note. 240, that is the first 16th note. So there's 16th note number 1, 16th note number 2. 480 is the 8th note, and 720 is the fourth 16th note. So 16th note 1, 0. 16th note number 2 is 240. 16th note number 3 is 480, aka the 8th note. And 16th note number 4 is 720. Those numbers are always going to be those numbers. Now, we can even dive deeper into 32nd notes, and then you're going to get another series of notes. You're going to get a 32nd note is 120 ticks. So you can just do the math. You got 1, 0, 0, 0 is the first 32nd. Then you got 120. The third 32nd is also the first 16th, which is 240. The third 32nd note is 360. The fourth 32nd note is also the 8th note, 480. The fifth is 600. The sixth, which is also the fourth 16th note, is 720. And then finally, the final 32nd note in a beat, the eighth 32nd note in a beat is 840. Those numbers must be memorized, burned into your brain. They are very important. But we're going to edit in 16ths today. We don't need to go any deeper than that. So the resolution of this grid is 16th notes. That's what we did the first lesson on. That's what we're doing this one on. We're resolving to 16th notes. Okay. The tempo for this song is 120. Really? No, it's 111. Why does that say 120? Am I not using? Oh, conductor track is active. Oh, that's the manual tempo. Let me just kind of, for the sake of Jake, put that at 111. So the tempo is 111 beats per minute. Okay. All right. Here we go. Just like before, first thing we want to do, put the cursor back into slip mode, and we're just going to go through and we're going to start to make some cuts. Cut this into syllables. I'm just going to start by just cutting all the big syllables apart. I think that's an S. No, it's a breath. Okay. And it doesn't matter how tight you cut these, because we're going to repair all these gaps later anyway. So if you are sloppy about how you cut these gaps, it really doesn't matter, because we're going to go over each and every one of these gaps. Okay. I'm just going to work on the first chunk first, and we'll come back to that second chunk. I'm just going to grab this. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to look. A lot of times what I do is I don't pay so much attention to the attack, because sometimes people, they don't quite nail where the first beginning of the phrase goes. But by the time they get into the middle of it, they're pretty good. So that's the case here. As you can see, this last little hump is in perfect sync. So I don't want to move that, because he finally did get into sync. But he comes in late here, and he comes in early there. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to make my mark here and here. And see, from that point on, it's pretty much in sync. So I don't really want to mess with this, because it's already good. This last little syllable here, I'm going to nudge forward. So we'll do that. Now here's the fun thing. We can pop this to grid, something we didn't do on the first lesson. So I'm going to go Command 0, not O, but 0 on the top of the QWERTY keyboard. And if you hit Command 0, and it just pops it right onto the grid. So pop, there it is. So that's like a really quick way of doing it. I'm going to put an edit thing, Command E right there, and I'm going to just pop that, Command 0, pop. There it goes. Okay, and I'll fill that gap later. So that's just a really quick way to do it. I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to put a mark right there, Command E. I'm going to put a mark right there, Command E, and then I'm just going to pop it, Command 0, pop. Command 0, pop. There it goes, right into where I want it. Now, it's going to mess all this up, but I'm going to come back and fix that later. Okay. All right, so same thing here. I'm actually just going to nudge that because it's pretty close. So I'll nudge it back. So those are pretty much, that first peak right there is pretty much in alignment. We'll come back and we'll fix the attack transient. I'm just kind of doing kind of a initial pass on this to kind of get, now this looks like if I just pop this one onto the beat, it's going to fix a lot of this. See, that's a little late. So pop, pop. And then that's still a little late. So I'm going to put another mark there. Pop, pop, bang, boom. All right. And we'll come back and make that tidier in a minute. And I'm going to put a mark there. I'm just going to cut it. Put another Command E there. Command E. And pop and pop. Okay. All right. That's a good first start. We'll come back in lesson 3, lesson number 2, part 3 in a moment.